Welcome back. A question for our audience. Do you know where your friends from grade school or grammar school are today? Could you imagine yourself in your current career working directly with those same kids, grown up, of course? You may be surprised to hear that Gavin Wood, Polkadot co-founder, Ethereum co-founder, and computer scientist, throughout his life and career has kept his close friends closer than most. Today, Gav is joined by Alistair Stewart, who is the lead researcher at Web3 Foundation, working on protocol design, the architect between Grandpa and many of Polkadot's other core protocols, and also Aeron Buchanan, who is a Web3 Foundation council member and also worked closely with Gav and the team at the Ethereum Foundation when they were building Ethereum 1.0. All three hold advanced computer science degrees, worked on building Ethereum, and have spent the past 4 years building Polkadot, decades after first meeting at a grammar school in the UK. So for today's closing act, we thought it'd be great to get to know these three over a beer or two to discuss life, work, and Web 3.0. Welcome, gentlemen.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Coordinate this. Ears up, and we're gonna try to hit the middle target here. Ready? 3, 2, 1. Cheers.
That worked.
That kind of worked. So to start off, I sort of set the stage. You guys have all known each other for quite a long time, so maybe you can tell the story of how you all met. Let's start. Let's go clockwise, starting with Gav.
Oh well, I mean, you know, I knew Aeron and Al probably from lunchtime room when we were like 11 years old. But got to know both more later on. Aeron, as he lived not too far away from my grand's house, so when I used to stay there in Lancaster, I used to go on his paper round, help him out. Delivering papers and talking about various things. And we also worked together a little bit at school on like random other projects, one of which was a nice little computer game. Al, of course, I knew at school, but we became much closer friends some point later, basically after we'd all left school, but mostly came back to Lancaster for beers to chat over how life was going some years later. And yeah, we ended up talking a lot about various scientific subjects, not least computers, and ended up working together quite closely at the foundation.
Great. Before we get into the beers more, or before we get into the computer science part of it more, Al and I were talking the other day, and I was a little bit surprised when he said, I asked, when was the first time you remember all having a beer together? Al, maybe you can fill us in on what you remember.
Oh, well, yeah, I'm pretty certain we all had a fair amount of alcohol before we were 18, but together, maybe not until afterwards. But yeah.
I think it was
Aeron,
definitely around
tell
the
us
time,
a bit about
though,
what.
right? Like I remember Aeron giving us lifts home back before we went to uni, from Friday, Saturday nights out playing pool and having a few beers.
For sure. I was a designated driver, I was teetotal for many years after school, so I was there drinking in spirit, but not spirit literally.
Nice. So you all grew up with some of the earlier sort of personal computers and the internet. Tell us like about the first time you learned about programming and like started like sort of building or learning those skills together. What was that like?
Oh, so my first computer was a ZX Spectrum 48K, where the RAM had to be physically inserted into the back of the machine. And my first foray into programming was with BASIC and drawing sine waves on the screen. But yeah, after finishing paper rounds, we'd often go back to Gav's Grands and talk about the latest things that Gav was looking into. Distinctly remember threading being a pretty cool topic for quite some time before actually building bigger games.
In my case, I definitely got into coding when I was like about 8. And just trying to see what this machine, in this case an Amstrad PCW, could do. As you do when you're that age, and you make it print silly things and do.
It's sort of the best way to learn. Gav, how about you? I know that you're, yeah, beeps and boops.
Yeah, I mean, I was
the origins of electronic music.
Yeah, right. Yeah, my first computer was Texas Instruments TI-99/4A. Got it secondhand from the guy on the opposite side of the street for like 10 quid. It wasn't the best machine. It was pretty old even when I got it in like 88, 89. But all my friends at school had Spectrum. Some of the luckier ones had an Amiga 500. But that wasn't going to be my fate for some years to come. But the good thing, I suppose, in retrospect, about having this Texas Instruments machine was that it didn't really have any games. So it came with like this kind of crappy version of BASIC. I didn't even have the manual. I just had to kind of learn it trial and error. But a friend in the same housing estate that I lived, he had the manual for it. So I would borrow it from time to time, or more likely go to his, and because he often wouldn't be so keen on me borrowing it, go to his and like read it while he was playing games, and teach myself that way. And then eventually I got a Spectrum ZX Spectrum Plus 3, which had a floppy disk drive, but the floppy disks were incredibly expensive. They weren't
CPM
3.5 inch. Yeah, did it? No.
3 inch. Yeah. So my Amstrad PCW had 3-inch disk drives and CPM, and that was
so bad. Like they were like £3 per disc or something. It was like completely unaffordable.
No, I had a few of those.
So yeah, I mostly did coding on that as well. But then eventually the Amiga 500, and that was really when things started to get a bit better. With that, I could do music. I did a few bits of music on the machine, and I also did quite a few like video games. One of which was called was like this Bomberman clone that I sort of co-created with Aeron. Aeron did all of the graphics for it, and it ended up looking pretty sweet to the point that it got a pretty decent review in the biggest magazine at the time for the Amiga.
Yeah. You sent I got the
I think we played that ourselves for quite some
which
time.
I will share.
A lot of entertainment.
I'll share that the actual magazine page from, I believe it was September 1996. Quite a well-reviewed game, although they did say any other week it would have won their top prize. And then what did they say? That Bomberman Professional though was a much better game to play. Slight dig.
Yeah.
So you mentioned Aeron, that was an early sort of project that you worked on with computers. You had done a lot of the programming, and Aeron, you were working on some of the designs.
Oh, that's right. So obviously, you're running around the maze with your bombs, and had to deal with a large range of enemies, and they all had to look distinctive and menacing. So geometric shapes featured prominently in the design. It was fun.
Honestly, games were a little bit different, but in a way more fun. I find myself going back to like Tetris and having more fun with it than I do like Call of Duty a lot of the times nowadays, which is interesting. You also had some other sort of non-computer science experiences together that have influenced how you think and work today. You work together on a board game, and you all still love playing board games together and otherwise. Can you tell me a bit about the board game that you guys put together?
There it is.
Oh my gosh.
There it is.
Cool. So this was, I mean, we loved playing board games. I mean, we still do, although I don't have all that much time to do much board gaming. board gaming these days. But we used to go to a games convention called the Sheffield Triples. This is something that we also all did like since childhood. It unfortunately has moved location now. It's in this like out of town part of Sheffield rather than being at the university. But I digress. The idea, like, we used to like go to a board game shop. If you've seen The Simpsons, you know the comic book shop guy. There's a guy who ran this board games shop in Lancaster that looks pretty similar to the comic book shop guy in The Simpsons. And he also had a stall in this games convention. So we used to go there quite a lot. It was like it became a sort of focal point of the year as much as Christmas or Eurovision Song Contest. It's a time to sort of get together and play some games. And one of these years it was sort of thought, oh, some of these games have interesting mechanics. Wouldn't it be good to try and combine them? So I think around about Christmas or New Year, around 2000, and I don't think we've worked it out, have we? But like 2008 or 9, I guess. We were sat in the pub. I think it was like, I can't actually remember which of us it was, but
I think I was like, involved in that. Yeah.
Let's like try and do this game.
How the chess, your chessboard and the pack of cards.
Yeah, I think maybe did we go to some shop in Lancaster, Aeron, and buy a couple of packs of cards and the chessboard? It was definitely with one of you. I remember going into one of these pound shops and buying.
No, that was me. That was me.
Okay,
yeah.
Okay. Requisite equipment, and like having a pint of beer and marking some cards and marking the board and like coming up with some rules. It was quite good fun. We did that for quite a few days in a row, and then eventually, the rules matured, and then it just became a case of producing.
And then Aeron spent a long time cutting up little wooden blocks.
Yeah, lots of little wooden blocks. I've still got the notebook actually where I designed all of the different components because I sketched, a dozen different ideas for each piece and how they could tessellate together and, how they would fit on the board so that they would demonstrate all the different aspects of the rule system that was evolving. But in the end, there's a lot of design into, right, how can this be made by hand in my garage? And I had a laser cutter set up, and
I remember buying that. I remember that was a great buzzsaw.
Exactly. And I had a load of other things like a automatic sander where I could feed the blocks into the top and they would come down and then be sanded until they were smooth enough to then be painted. And
this was actually a sander sat upside down with a funnel on top, right? That was the automatic sander.
Yes, that's right. But yeah, so that was a lot of wooden blocks and a lot of painting. I had the rig set up so that I could just go along watching various boring TV shows while I think I watched a lot of CSI while painting blocks that Christmas.
It's like 60,000 blocks, was it?
In the end, yeah.
Wow.
Because there's like 200 blocks for each game. No, more than that, including the
pretty good
blocks.
Production run. So from wooden blocks to blockchains. I'm sure she put up with it totally same way my mother would. When are you cleaning this up?
Exactly. She knew what the future held with blocks, so she was very forward looking in that way.
So
the paintings were great though. Anyway.
Yeah. We're definitely gonna have to share a couple of these images of these things afterwards. I have, like I said, the magazine from Bomberman, and then we'll get some good shots from you, Aeron, of the Milton Keynes board game setup that we can distribute, because I think it's really fun. You can start to see though, like computer science and game theory, two really significantly important pieces of building these distributed consensus systems. So let's sort of fast forward a little bit. You've all gone to college, kept in touch, achieved fairly advanced computer science degrees. Gav, you continued to sort of like blend your sort of love of music and electronics and computer science in your academic career. Maybe you could talk a little bit about that sort of phase of your development.
Yeah, sure. So I mean, this was a little after the board game escapade. It didn't take us too long to realize that the board game probably wasn't going to make us millionaires. So we decided to try and do something a little bit more I don't know, useful to the world, I guess. And we hit upon the idea of like making like PhD was in music visualization. We hit upon the idea of like making great light shows. So making a system that could really help execute and orchestrate light shows for gigs, for nightclubs. So we sort of Aeron and I sort of entered into this partnership together. Lancaster Logic Response is the name of the company, and we set about building a box that could pull in audio music and push out lighting instructions to that sort of commonly found lights could interpret. And we spent about a year and a half doing this. And we actually got it installed in a couple of clubs in London. We made some business contacts.
One of us still owes us 80 quid.
Yeah, still owes us 80 quid. And we're not going to bother holding him to that, probably.
A little bit. That nightclub was amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was there with the drilling into the wall to fix all of these advanced lighting modules onto the wall, the robot lights that would swing in time to the music. Get it all set up. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, and we
awesome. Gav, you have your Pretty Lights shirt on today.
We did coding for the lights to try and to ensure that the lights, the DMX instructions, could be created from the software that I was doing. So hooking it up to the music information retrieval systems that I saw, similar ones that I studied for my PhD. And I remember, this doing this gig with my housemate at the time, who was an electronic musician, setting it up in this club and having like a real-time light show where we were like pumping different elements of the music into the box. And I remember the box, I did a pretty cool design for the box. The box actually looked pretty sweet, like the physical thing that got installed in the nightclub. I remember there was a notable engineering decision that had to be made, and it was we were trying to use a Raspberry Pi to do this, to run the software for to generate the light show, and it needed to it had to connect to a controller, and the controller was on the Wi-Fi system, so it needed to connect to Wi-Fi, and the Raspberry Pi's Wi-Fi card was it was fine, but after an hour or so, it would disconnect just randomly and wouldn't reconnect. So it would just break after an hour, randomly. And we tried fitting in an external Wi-Fi card and did the same thing. Just like the drivers in Linux were just not made for like mission critical Wi-Fi. And in the end, we came to the conclusion that the best way of doing this was to get a super cheap router, like a router that cost like 10 quid, and put the router in the box with the Raspberry Pi, and then have a wired connection between the router and the Raspberry Pi. And then the tablet would then just connect to the router, rather than trying to make them both connect over Wi-Fi, peered Wi-Fi to each other. And sure enough, that worked super well. And the only issue was, as I remember, there was this, the transformer. We had to somehow get power into the router.
So in fact, the most crucial engineering element of all of this, like we were connecting together, daisy chained top end nightclub lights and everything like, and we had a beautiful box, and I had it engraved on the top with the logo and everything, and it had really cool looking antenna coming out from the cheap router, but it kind of looked pretty cool. But the crucial engineering aspect of all of this was making sure that the heatsink was connected to the case well enough, so the whole thing didn't just melt after 1 hour of operation in a club full of people, raising
sweaty
the
nightclub.
And you only get these things sorted by actually, because when you're in your bedroom wiring it all up, the environment isn't 100% humidity at 30-degree temperature with smoke machines
with vibrating
going,
music.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it sounds like the production crew here is kind of laughing. Where we set up a mesh network here to get better internet in to ensure the video feed. So the problems persist, and I think it's just going to be like this forever. So moving on a bit, Al, you were more. Your career path took you more towards academia for a longer time, I think, than
So what happened is
your coworkers.
While these guys were trying to set up businesses for nightclub lights, they persuaded me to go back to university and do computer science. So originally I did maths, didn't do much with it, and ended up hanging around in Lancaster a lot with Gav. But then I went back to university, did computer science, and just stayed there. Basically, did a master's, a PhD, and then postdocs, and sort of digging into more of a theory direction. With my background, that made sense. So I got more into theoretical computer science, and this kind of gave me a different perspective, I think, on blockchain than many people. It has lots of cryptographers and systems people.
Yeah, so tell us about how you found your way from academia to the Web3 Foundation more recently.
Well, so obviously I've been exposed to this. So I remember hanging around with Gav when he was coding up Ethereum in the early days, working every day until 8 p.m., even though we're on Christmas, New Year's holidays.
You even came to the to DevCon 0, right? You were on a panel.
Yeah, but this was later. This was later. This was later, yeah. So we're exposed to this idea. I didn't, find out about Bitcoin seriously until Ethereum came along. Yes, and then Gavin, while they were setting up FDev in Berlin, they invited me over a couple of times. And I started looking into proof of stake, how to do that. Because obviously Ethereum had a plan to do proof of stake back in 2014. And it's just about started happening now. And and we were looking at the existing systems and seeing why they didn't work. Yes, and I ended up at DevCon 0, talked a bit to Vlad. And ended up at a panel for which the video can now no longer be found, thankfully. And then at that point, I could. At that point, I could have, given it up and gone into Ethereum, but I wanted to stick it out in academia and learn how to, how to think, how to write, how to approach the kind of problems we're doing, and that kind of helped. But I'd always sort of kept on following what was going on in the blockchain space. It was sort of 2017 when taxi drivers started, people you hired as Uber drivers started asking you about Bitcoin. At that point, it was like, maybe this is worth a second look. And I had the postdoc lined up at Stanford, but I had visa issues and I had to go back to Britain for 3 months. So I thought, okay, I should ask Gav for a job. And I'm still here 3 years later.
Awesome. So I want to come back to you in a minute and talk about some of the, cheers. I want to come back to you in a minute to talk about some of the protocol design within Polkadot. But Aeron, how about you give a little bit of a recap of getting brought in and working with Gav on Ethereum the first time around, and then what you learned from that experience and how you've applied it to Polkadot and hopefully smoothed out some of the bumps that the Ethereum project dealt with early on.
Yeah, so obviously the Ethereum project was a pretty big deal in hindsight, and it's obviously a lot to learn from that. But something that sticks in my mind is when Gav first explained to me the concept that became Ethereum, and we were on the back seat of a crappy bus driving into London from Stansted Airport, and Gav was going through the minutiae of how the Ethereum protocol would work, and I didn't fully understand it at that point, but it was clear that this was something major, and discussions continued over the following months, and then Gav had the idea of setting up in Berlin, which for many reasons was an excellent idea. But of course, starting a dev shop from scratch is no mean feat. So in Berlin, needed somewhere to work. We needed people to actually do the work, and it all needed to be done in a very short time. And the whole situation was made a very tight budget. Yeah, for sure. I think technically speaking, I could probably bill the Ethereum Foundation for quite a few items, which now is no problem. But at the time, getting everything sorted was quite stressful. But it really struck home the importance of getting the right people working in the right environment, because it's so easy to end up with conflicts of interest and people who just try and take advantage, or for whatever reason, people just disagreeing about things. So getting good people who are on board and ready to focus is so important. And so kind of obviously having the experience, but also the contacts from getting ETH Dev set up, I think made getting the Polkadot project going much easier.
Gav, anything to add there before we jump into more of the latest, greatest with Polkadot?
No. Well, yeah. Ethereum kicked off actually in Lancaster with these guys, for me at least. So Vitalik had published the white paper, I don't know, a week or two prior to when I'd seen it. I was told about it by one of my sort of mates, Johnny Bitcoin, also one of Vitalik's mates. And that would have been early December, I guess. So come mid-December, I was going back to Lancaster for Christmas, and was down the pub with I guess probably with these two guys, and was like, oh yeah, gonna start coding this protocol called Ethereum. And they were like, oh yeah, fair enough. So I went to Dow's, who's a friend of ours, a common friend, also went to school with, and went there immediately following Christmas. Just sort of usually chill there for a little while, for a few days, often over New Year. And that's when I started really. I mean, I think I initially started coding Ethereum like a few days before Christmas, but many of the bigger commits went in around that sort of time between Christmas and New Year 2013. I remember I was sat on the couch with like probably Aeron and Al wandering around in the room, trying to help out Jeff, the other sort of coder guy from the Ethereum founder set. And yeah, I mean, fast forward, we got to I guess June or July, and I think it was it June, and I sort of cunningly persuaded you to go on a road trip, which was kind of fun, but didn't last that long as a road trip. I guess it was more of a lift to Berlin. But yeah, we stayed in Berlin for some time. We sort of moved there together. Yeah, stayed there for some months, I guess, like mid 2014.
Yep.
And that's where we were when the Ethereum crowd sale happened. And it was, I think, in Berlin, not actually much before the Ethereum crowd sale, that I think the three of us got together and started thinking about proof of stake for the very first time. I think it was when we were staying at Bloicherstrasse in Berlin, in this fairly large flat. And I think it was the three of us, and we were like trying to come up with, I think we more or less did come up with an early proof of stake algorithm.
Because at that time, we were looking at all of the other things, and Al came up with a way to overcome Next, which I think was probably the foremost proof of stake protocol at the time. Mm-hmm. And we're like, right, okay, if we get this amount of hash power and can get in with this attack in this 15-second time frame, then we'll be able to take over the next protocol. That was something that Al came up with in a couple of hours in that very flat.
Yeah. So I think we came up with like a design for a proof of stake algorithm. We never took it forward, of course. It was all very focused on getting Ethereum delivered proof of work or otherwise. And then yeah, we pushed forward. We got Ethereum dev set up in Berlin, and I mean, as a UK subsidiary, I think we got the UK operations set up as well. So it was a pretty busy time, but thankfully it went okay, and Ethereum got delivered. But I remember trying to persuade Al to come in at the time, but yeah. And it wasn't to be, and it wouldn't be until a few years later that it happened.
Eventually, though, he did come and say, can you give me a job at the Web3 Foundation for a bit in between academic pursuits? And like you said, Al, you're still here, so maybe this is a good place. You did eventually deliver a proof of stake protocol that's now in production in Kusama and Polkadot. So you want to talk a little bit about your sort of backgrounds and sort of thinking about proof of stake. Like Gav mentioned earlier, you were on the very first Ethereum proof of stake panel at DevCon 0 with Vitalik and Vlad, but have now built Grandpa and also contributed heavily and designed many of the protocols that power Polkadot.
Yes. I can't pretend that I really knew about proof of stake in 2014. We might have had this plan to attack Next. We might have, but that wasn't particularly impressive because I remember on this panel, and Vitalik wanted to make it adversarial, but no one wanted to take the proof of work side, and it didn't really work. But yes, so having come back from academia, I caught up on the latest and greatest in proof of stake design. Casper FFG and Casper TFG. Vitalik and Vlad's protocols for Ethereum and what everyone else was doing with Byzantine agreement, and tried to work out like how would I do a proof of stake protocol. And of course, I had no idea about the area, never done anything with distributed computation before, but it's still relatively easy because it's all sort of, the only maths involved is counting. And I came up with Grandpa. And the nice thing about that was that having proved it worked, within a week, Rob Habermeyer was already coding it. Possibly because I pointed out some of the flaws in Rhododendron, the current consensus they were using, the Parity was using, and that was a different experience. So from academia, no one, we came up with some very good ideas, how to do things properly in machine learning, how to deal with robustly, how to deal with errors in your data, with arbitrary errors, with things that could have been maliciously introduced, and not enough people cared to actually use it. But if you go into blockchain, and things were very different. So yes, I came up with Grandpa. That was a different experience, mostly because I was on my own, the sort of only researcher at Web3 Foundation. And after that, we've been working on other protocols. We brought in more people, so I could work on availability with Jeff, on NPAS with Alfonso, on Babe with Handan, and all these protocols that ended up actually being the reason why Polkadot is slow and doesn't work. But is probably slightly more secure than it would otherwise be. And yeah, it's been fun.
All jokes aside, about Polkadot being slow and not working, great props to you and your team for delivering so much of the research and technical underpinnings for the code running today. And I think that's actually a good segue, Gav, to get into discussing where we're at today and maybe giving the community a bit of an update. I know we're in the midst of getting Parachains live on Kusama, so if you wanted to give a bit of a review, maybe the truncated version of your blog post that we put out earlier this week, which we'll also share again in the chat so people can give that a look.
Sure, yeah. So, I mean, as I'm sure everyone here knows, we've been working on getting the final phase of launch done for some time. Parachains have been just around the corner for a little while now, but yes, we are at the point where we are reasonably confident enough to send our canary network into the void, into the caves, and sniff out the atmosphere. So yeah, we have our Parachains implementation. It's been working reasonably well on Rococo. We've seen a bunch of chains on there. It's been progressing nicely. And we have therefore decided to initiate the sort of final stage of the launch, which is to getting it into Kusama. The way they're actually doing this happens in a few stages, inevitably. One of them is, the first one is to deploy what's called, well, the very first one is to actually get the Parachains logic. So all of the stuff to do with Parachains actually in the runtime and in the network's validator code. So the validators have to upgrade to the version of the client that supports Parachains. That's 0.9. Thankfully, the vast majority on Kusama have. And then the Kusama runtime needs to be upgraded to support Parachains, which is the runtime upgrade of 9010, and that's done and dusted. That happened last week. So following that, we're going to deploy Parachain. That happened on Monday. Parachain is the shell Parachain. It's a Parachain whose runtime I wrote in the last few weeks. It's very, very simple. It's the simplest runtime that has probably ever been written. It doesn't really do anything. The only thing it does is listen for upgrade authorizations. So basically, the only thing it knows how to do is be upgraded. But it's a nice first step because it has to progress. So we can see the number going up. We can see the blocks are being added. They're being finalized. They're being validated and backed. So this is all very important sort of testing that we're doing to make sure that it seems to be mostly working before we try and do anything really serious on it, like starting to put a real parachain on, such as state mint or state mine, I think, for Kusama, and then issuing tokens on it. So yeah, shell was launched on Monday. we found a bug. Well, actually, we found a few bugs, but one always finds bugs in software. But they're being ironed out, and we expect that we'll be releasing 092 pretty soon, today or tomorrow, that will address these issues once we're confident that, basically once we see Shell operating smoothly for 24 hours, then we will be upgrading it. We'll be upgrading it to StateMine. So StateMine is a parachain. It's a common good parachain. So it doesn't have any special tokens on or anything. It's not beneficial to any particular team. It's really just something that's useful for the general Kusama and when the time comes, Polkadot community. It essentially allows anyone to issue tokens. And this will eventually, at the moment it supports fungible tokens. Eventually it's going to support NFTs as well. And it's also supports XCM. So other parachains can also own the tokens that exist on StateMine. They can move them around. They can use them as a reserve and all the rest of it. This I would expect to happen if all goes well later on this week, but we'll see. Once that is done and we're happy that StateMine is executing properly, then we will begin auctions. We're basically going to get other teams throw in their hat to deploy their parachain. And of course, these will be the first parachains deployed on a relay chain in the world ever. So they should be ready to expect chaos, but hopefully there won't be too much chaos. The auctions will begin. At the moment, we haven't finalized it yet. I'll put out a blog post when we do finalize it, but it's looking likely that the auctions will be for 7 days each, 5 of which may or may not ultimately count in deciding who the winner is. So the idea if you haven't read about it, the idea of these auctions is that they're candle auctions, but they're retroactive candle auctions. So basically 2 days, it's like a normal auction. And if you bid higher, then you will definitely win, or definitely win over the previous bids. But after the 2 days, after these first 2 days, the run-in period, then it becomes this kind of uncertain ending period. And during this period, it will continue for 5 days anyway, but we'll choose a random point in the 5 days at which the auction will have been decided to have ended retroactively. And this basically means that even if you put a higher bid in later on, there's a chance, and the later you go, the higher the chance, that it won't be counted. That it will actually be an earlier bid, even though it's lower, that will be the winner. And this has been analysed thoroughly, I'm told, by the Web3 research team, by Al, and it is a solid plan, I'm told. So good. The expectation is that the highest bid should come in after within the sort of 2 days, and not there won't be all that many sort of big up bids within the ending period. But yeah, whatever, we shall see. So 7 day auctions, back to back, and we'll do 5. We'll do 5 initially, I think, and then we'll see how it goes. We'll see how Kusama is behaving, and if it's looking good, we'll probably leave it a week or 2. But if it's looking good, then we'll push forward. Of course, I say all this; it's the council that decides. It's not me. But this would be our recommendation. We'll push forward and maybe bring on another 5, and then basically expand conservatively, but expand as much as we feel the network can manage. But it's worth pointing out that this is the first time that we're doing this. There are no other relay chains. There are no other parachains. So Kusama is very much being the canary in the coal mine here, and it's as much an experiment as running tests on your testnet, or tests even in a unit test is an experiment. We don't know how it's going to behave with real incentives, with real transactions, with real code, with real teams making real mistakes. We just don't know yet. But once it looks that Kusama is stable with, a few parachains, maybe even several parachains, then we'll begin the same process on Polkadot.
Great. Anything else to add, Al or Aeron, on where Polkadot's at right now? Otherwise, I'll have a couple just fun questions, and then we'll close it out for the day.
Well, so it's a case of we have this thing, we have parachains, they work well in the testnet. Do they work well in the real world? Are validators doing the right thing? We have to educate them a bit on making the right choices, because the world with parachains in it is going to be very different. Validators are going to be doing different things. We have to scale this protocol up. We have to test it under real world conditions, and we're going to scale it up slowly. There will be bugs on the way. We're going to stop at certain levels and go past. The road to 100 parachains will not be smooth, I don't think, on either Kusama or Polkadot, but I think we'll get there. And likewise with all the other features that we need to add.
Yeah. The key point there being it will be a lot smoother and manageable with governance versus having to fork the chain every single time you need to fix a bug, which we've learned from Ethereum and Bitcoin and any other sort of fork choice rule focused governance systems, non-governance systems is not.
Of course, there are so many bugs that we fixed on Kusama. It's amazing that it works. We have this, the governance model. We've had a number of interesting breakages, including having to rewind time at one point to convince people they hadn't finalized something. But it worked, even though. And we need this because what we're trying to deploy is a lot more complicated than has been done in the past with blockchain.
A lot more complicated.
Yeah.
It's taken maybe 20 to 50, depending on how you count them, expert developers, 3 years to get to where we are now, which is just at the point of releasing the fully functional Parachains version of the protocol. Compare that to a few weeks that it took me and that it took Jeff to get a functional version of Ethereum, right? A few weeks for one developer versus 3 years for like 20, 30, 40, dozens of expert developers.
And just to do the
exponential complexity.
Dig at Bitcoin, it still doesn't implement the white paper.
Wow. Yeah. And Ethereum, we were talking in 2014 about Ethereum doing proof of stake. It just takes that long to do anything that's worth doing, really.
And it's harder without governance.
You have to realize that.
Yeah, but with a meta protocol that has forkless upgrades and governance, it can be the fluidity means that it can actually, these kinds of upgrades can happen an awful lot sooner.
True words. All right, 2 or 3 fun ones. The first one being, Gav, a lot of people have asked, there seems to be some bionic arm on the table behind you. What is the bionic arm?
Yes. It's actually not a bionic arm. Quite the opposite. It's neither. It's not an arm from the future. Rather, it's a hand from the past. It's it's a bit of armor. Now I'm not really.
You code with that on?
I'm not really a knight, so I don't really need this day to day. But it was a gift from an old friend, lovely bloke, Louis. Louis, if you're out there,
Louis.
Hope Thailand's going well. But yeah, he actually bought it on a random, presumably quite lonely evening in London back in 2014, and on eBay one late night, and showed me it when I was around that weekend. And about I think last year he sort of said, "Oh, your flat looks a bit empty here. Have a lovely bit of armor." And I said, thanks for the armor. So now it's one of my mantelpiece pieces.
You're going to collect the rest of the set.
One. Small piece of Polkadot history. Louis was the designer
I kind of
the original
wanted some chainmail, like a nice chainmail vest, but it didn't. I wasn't able to. Well, I saw one in San Francisco before Burning Man a few years back, but I couldn't. I don't know. I was persuaded not to buy it. The better part of me said you should buy it, but the person that I was with at the time insisted that it was impractical. Yeah, you know what? I think it'd been great because, like, yeah, maybe it's a bit heavy, but it's just going to build your muscle mass, isn't it? It's going to burn a bit of energy. It sounds good. Like, I mean, I don't know. I think you get it past airport. I don't think airport security is going to have anything to say about a chainmail vest. So you can as
long as you don't walk in wearing
a metal
it.
Detector, but
yeah,
look, we're proof of stake people. It's not about burning energy.
Well, yeah, personal energy is okay.
Nice. And the last question for the three of you, it was one of my favorites from the Q&A. If you were a three-piece band, who plays bass?
I'd volunteer.
Yeah, I guess
yeah, because I'd be on the drum.
Yes, Aeron would be on the drum, Gav would be on the lead, guitarist, vocals.
Yeah, so Alan bass for sure. Yeah. Fantastic.
Well, on that, I appreciate you all staying up late into the evening to join us all to close out the first day of Polkadot Decoded. We look forward to seeing all of the advancements in Polkadot coming soon with Parachains. So thank you very much.